Wow, look at this crowd. I was honored to speak at the first Summit for Americans for Prosperity, and it's incredible to see how you've grown. The protesters, I was thinking a little bit about Reagan. This is a Reagan dinner. When Reagan was governor of California, this was actually in the late 60s, the anti-war movement was underway. There were plenty of hippies and plenty of protesters. And they would surround Reagan's gubernatorial limousine. And one time they silently held up signs that said, "We are the future." And Reagan kind of peered through the glass and he scribbled his response and he held it up and it said, "I'll sell my bonds." Now, 200 years ago, when the American founders sat around a table to form a new country, they believed that they had hit upon a formula for a new kind of society, one that had never existed before. And the American founders believed that if this formula were adopted, this new country would in time become the strongest, the most prosperous, the most powerful, the most admirable, the most emulated society on the planet. And so it has been. And this idea that there's something unique about America is today called American exceptionalism. But it's worth thinking for a moment about what is exceptional about America. What actually makes America unique? For me, as an immigrant, there's one thing that jumps out right away, and that is the fact that most of you in this room, you could come to India, my native country, you could live there, you could take Indian citizenship, you can work there, but you can't become Indian. Why? Because to be Indian, you need two things: brown skin and Indian parents. Indianness is a matter of birth and blood. And that's true of most countries in the world. But America isn't like that. The Irish, the Italians, the Jews, today the Koreans, the West Indians, you can come to America, and it sometimes takes a couple of generations, but you can actually become American. That's one unique and I think very positive aspect of America. And here's another. America is a country that is built on entrepreneurship. Historically, in most cultures, and even in the West, the entrepreneur has been reviled. In fact, the entrepreneur has been looked upon as a kind of low-life scum. In India, we have the caste system. Who's at the top? The Brahmins, the priests. And then come the warriors and the aristocrats and the royalty, and down the list you go. And then one step from the very bottom, just above the hated untouchable, is the merchant, the trader, the entrepreneur. I was reading an essay by the Muslim historian from the Middle Ages, Ibn Khaldun, one of the leading Muslim thinkers of the period. And he writes an essay in which he discusses which is a more moral way to get wealth, trade or looting. And he weighs the benefits of both and concludes that upon examination, it's maybe a close call, but clearly a more ethical way to get wealth is by looting. Why? He says because trade is a little bit effeminate. Trade sort of uses low cunning to take advantage of the wants of other people. Looting, he says, is very manly. Because in looting, you've got to beat a guy in open combat and take his stuff. And this, he says, draws on the masculine virtue of courage. Now, I tell you all this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it makes a genuine point that historically, if you have a totem pole, the entrepreneur is at the bottom. Hey, that's even true in Europe. Even today in Europe, inherited money is better than earned money. The assumption is that if you earned it, there are lots of people you had to stomp on to get it. In America, by contrast, the American founders take this totem pole and they flip it. So the entrepreneur goes from the bottom to the top. We are an entrepreneurial society, and that has been key to our success. This brings me to that very strange man in the White House, Barack Obama, who is, in all honesty, a mystery man. He was seen by many people to be a traditional Democrat, but he's not a traditional Democrat. He's not like Clinton or Dukakis or even Kerry or Jimmy Carter. There's something different about him. And what I'd like to do briefly today is to try to tell you what that is. In some sense, over the past few years, there have been all these theories about Obama. He's the reincarnation of Martin Luther King. He's the first African-American president. Or, on the conservative side, he's a Muslim. Or he was born in another country. Or he is a European-style socialist. Now, interestingly, all these descriptions of Obama, when you apply them, they don't really fit. Or if they're javelins that are thrown against Obama, they graze him, but they seem to kind of bounce off. Something seems to be missing. Let me suggest that in some ways we can understand Obama by asking a really simple question, namely, what is Obama's dream? Is it the American dream? Is it Martin Luther King's dream, or is it something else? Now, it's not the American dream in the sense that the founders understood it. Even Obama explicitly said it wasn't. He was asked about American exceptionalism. He said, nah, we're no more exceptional than the Greeks, the Brits, anyone else. Is it Martin Luther King's dream? Oddly enough, no. Obama is in some ways a tribute to the success of the colorblind idea. On the other hand, never in his life has he actually defended that idea. Obama, by the way, does like to quote Martin Luther King, and here's his favorite quote: "The fierce urgency of now." But all that Obama means by that is that we should act right now to do what he wants. There's no appeal to King's ideals. Nothing about the colorblind society. So what is Obama's dream? The beautiful thing about this is we don't have to guess. If you simply pick up his own autobiography, it tells you right on the cover, "Dreams from My Father." Notice the title is not "Dreams of My Father." Obama's not telling you about his father's dreams. Dreams from my father means here are the dreams that I, Obama, got from my dad. And so who was his dad? His dad was a very strange guy. He grew up in Kenya at the time when Kenya was fighting for independence from the British. Ideologically, his father was an anti-colonialist. And this was the viewpoint that shaped his life. What is anti-colonialism? Turns out that for many Americans it's a bit of a strange idea. I happen to understand it very well because I grew up in India. India, like Kenya, was ruled for a long time by the British. And anti-colonialism is a very simple notion, but a very powerful notion. We should know something about it. Why? Because it is the dominant political idea in the third world for the past 100 years. If you want to know why there's anti-Americanism around the world, you can say, well, Islam, but that would only explain the Muslim world. What about Asia? What about Africa? What about South America? The anti-colonial ideology is even today predominant. And what is it? Well, very simply, it's the idea that the world is divided into two. There are the colonizers, who are the oppressors, and this is the West. And then there are the colonized, who are the victims. And these are the poor people of the third world. Anti-colonialism is based on the idea that the rich countries became rich by invading and occupying and looting the poor countries. And that within the rich countries, you have powerful concentrations of economic power. The banks, the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, the oil companies, and this is the economic wing of colonialism. These are the people who are ripping off the poor not only in the West, but around the world. And a final part of this idea is that the colonial baton has now passed from Europe to America. Today, it is not, in this view, it is not the British or the French who are conquering other countries, it is now America. We are, in the anti-colonial diagnosis, we are the rogue elephant in the world. So if this is the diagnosis, what's the cure? The cure is actually very simple. On the one hand, you have to put a leash on the rogue elephant that is America. You've got to yank it back. And second, what you've got to do is identify these concentrations of economic power, and you've got to smash them. You've got to defeat them. Notice, by the way, that so far I have not said one word about President Obama. I'm talking about the ideology of his dad. In 1965, Barack Obama Sr. wrote an article in the East Africa Journal called Problems Facing Our Socialism, and he asked a really interesting question, namely, how does a country get rid of powerful concentrations of wealth at the top? And his answer was, you have to use the power of the state to smash it. You have to use state power to confiscate people's land and their goods, not just their income, by the way, their wealth. But you should tax their income, and you should tax it at very high rates. To quote Barack Obama Sr., at rates, quote, up to 100%. 100% tax rates. Now, at the first glance, this may seem like a little nuts. Why would any sane person propose 100% taxation? But the fact of the matter is that if you insert the anti-colonial assumption, it actually makes perfect sense. If David Koch were to come to my house and steal all my furniture, what's the appropriate tax rate for him? 100%, because it's not his furniture. So when Barack Obama, President Obama now, says that people are not paying their fair share, notice he never specifies what that fair share actually is. If you read Obama's book, there is an amazing scene in which he goes to his father's grave. He flings himself on the ground, he weeps. He says, quote, "Through Africa's red soil I spoke to my father." And in some senses, he wants to get, poor man, he wants to get his father back. But his father's dead, killed in a drunk driving accident. He can't get his father back. And so Obama says, all right. In a moment of epiphany, he says, I can't get my father, but I'll take his dream. I can't have the man, but I'll take his ideas. I'll run with them. Where he failed, I will succeed. Now this raises a really interesting question. I've advanced a rather outlandish theory about where Obama gets his ideas. I'm saying that he essentially embraced the anti-colonial ghostly philosophy of his dad. How do we know if that's actually true? There's really only one way to know. That is to match up the anti-colonial ideology of the father with the public policy actions of the son, with what Obama has been actually doing in the White House. I'll have to be a little bit brief on this for reasons of time. But many of you know that one of Obama's very first actions when he came in the Oval Office was to insist that the bust of Winston Churchill be removed. Now, by the way, that by itself is not so odd. Presidents are allowed to put whoever they want in the Oval Office. But the point is, Obama was weirdly insistent that the bust go back to England. I mean, the British were like, this is embarrassing. You can put it somewhere else. Stick it in Biden's office. There are plenty of other places to put it, but Obama wanted it to go across the ocean. And in fact, the bust is now in the home of the British ambassador in Washington, D.C. It's off American soil. Now, no one has been able to explain why Obama would do this. But the fact of the matter is that when we think of Churchill, we think of the Nazis, we think about fighting for freedom. But Churchill is also the guy who said after he met Mahatma Gandhi, he said, "I will not be the Queen's first minister to preside over the end of the British Empire." Churchill was re-elected in the 50s, and he sent troops to defeat an anti-colonial uprising in Kenya. It was called, very bloody, it was called a Mau Mau uprising. And in that uprising were two people who were arrested. One fellow was named Onyango Obama, the president's grandfather. Another guy was Barack Obama Sr., the president's dad. And what I'm saying is that Barack Obama has very good reasons to hate the British and have a special loathing for Winston Churchill. If you look at Obama's actions from the very beginning, for example, his decision to block oil drilling here in America, which sounds a bit like an Al Gore environmentalist move. Al Gore goes around saying the earth has a fever, global warming, we should all use less, let's not drill. But then we find out that Obama has been subsidizing oil drilling in Brazil, and now in Colombia, and encouraging it in Mexico. So why would somebody be for oil drilling over there, but not over here? Is it for the oil to come here? No. The oil drilling is for the oil to stay in Brazil, and the Brazilians are selling some to the Chinese. Now I would suggest that if you put on the anti-colonial spectacles, you'll get a much clearer picture of what's going on. It has nothing to do with the environment. Obama could care less if the earth is getting hotter or colder. His idea is to put a burden on the former colonizers, which is us, and give the benefits to the previously colonized. Or if you look at what's going on in the world stage, no one has explained what I would call the paradox of the Arab Spring. We have seen uprisings in about 10 Muslim countries, from Tunisia to Bahrain to Egypt to Libya to Syria and earlier Iran. What does Obama do? He intervenes in Egypt using using diplomacy, and he intervenes in Libya using force. Meanwhile, in Syria, he does almost nothing, just some stern words. And in Iran, in a much bigger uprising, he absolutely does nothing. Why the principle of selectivity? Why get involved over here but not over there? You can't say it's because Obama's a secret Muslim. All of those guys are Muslims. On the other hand, if you plug in the anti-colonial assumption, which is that it is America that is perceived as the rogue elephant in the world, not North Korea, not Iran, we're the bad guy. And the basic idea is to reduce American influence in the region. Then I would submit that all of this makes perfect sense. Mubarak was probably the greatest American ally, not counting Israel, in the region. He's out. We don't know what's going to come in Egypt, but you can be pretty sure it's going to be more anti-Israel and more anti-American. Libya, Gaddafi, a bad guy, but a bad guy who had been doing business with us. Ever since the Iraq invasion, this was the bad guy who got nervous and has been basically paying reparations for terrorism, outing terrorists, sharing secrets, and so on. He's out, and no one's going to replace him. You can be pretty sure if Assad fell in Syria or the mullahs were replaced in Iran, we don't know what would come later, but it's a pretty good bet that it would be more pro-Israel and more pro-America than what's there now. In those countries, Obama takes no action. Where am I going with all this? My time is up and I gotta sum it up. Let me say it this way. Traditional Democrats, in my view, want to redistribute income in America. Obama wants to realign America in the world. And that is a completely different agenda. The reason that it's important to have a man's compass. We had Reagan's compass. When I was a young policy analyst in the Reagan White House, many times Reagan wasn't around. Peggy Noonan, Reagan's speechwriter, once said that when Reagan isn't around, the idea of Reagan rules. Which means that we can intuit, we can figure out what the man would do in this situation because we know his compass. The advantage of knowing Obama's compass is you can not only explain what he's doing, you can also predict what he's going to do in the next 4 years. toward the end of my book called The Roots of Obama's Rage, I made 3 predictions. I said, rest assured that in the rest of his term, Obama will do nothing meaningful to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. And he will spend money like a drunken sailor as if the deficit didn't even matter, but if he is forced to do something about it, he will cut the military and propose tax increases on the rich. And if you read the Obama budget, it's almost a clinical description of what he's doing. This is the man who has brought to an end the Reagan Revolution. The Reagan Revolution was very powerful. It continued in the 90s. It carried even Clinton in its tide. But the Reagan Revolution is over, and it has been ended by one man, Obama. So we shouldn't think of Obama as a fool, a bungler. He has been the most successful guy since Lyndon Johnson in moving and increasing the power of the state over our lives. So we shouldn't underestimate him. But there is one thing that stands between Obama and a second term, and that is the people in this room. Now we're all a little tired. There's a saying in India, after crossing the mountain, more mountains. And I think you know the feeling. But the truth of the matter is that what sustains us, what drives us, is that Reaganite ideal. Reagan's idea, ultimately, that America is a country that belongs to the people, that ultimately the decision about who governs us is in our hands. And I think that if we recognize this and understand the magnitude of the task before us and rally, we can ultimately change the direction of the country and bring ourselves a little bit closer to that destination that Reagan once called morning in America. Thank you very much.